Blinken spoke to Qatari Prime Minister Al Thani and Egyptian Foreign Minister Abdullati about tensions in the Middle East, the latest in a series of diplomatic engagements he has held over the past few days with counterparts in the region and around the world, including calls yesterday with G7 foreign ministers and Iraqi Prime Minister Soudani. The Secretary has delivered a consistent message in all of these engagements. We are at a critical moment for the region, and it is important that all parties take steps over the coming days to refrain from escalation and calm tensions. Escalation is in no one's interest. It's not in the interest of any one country, it's not in the interest of the region, and it's certainly not in the interest of the millions of civilians who just want to live their lives free from violence and conflict. The Secretary is also making clear through these engagements that the United States continues to see a ceasefire in Gaza as the crucial step to helping calm broader tensions, in addition to, of course, securing the release of hostages and addressing the ongoing suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And he is reiterating that all parties need to look for reasons to say yes to an agreement, not look for reasons to delay or say no. As the Secretary has emphasized, this is an important moment for the region, and it is critical that parties make the right decisions over the coming days. Turning to Bangladesh, we have seen the announcement that Prime Minister Hasina resigned from her position and departed Bangladesh. We are monitoring the situation carefully. The United States stands with the people of Bangladesh. We urge all parties to refrain from further violence. Too many lives have been lost over the course of the past several weeks, and we urge calm and restraint in the days ahead. We welcome the announcement of an interim government and urge any transition be conducted in accordance with Bangladesh's laws. Finally, we are deeply saddened about the reports of human rights abuses, casualties, and injuries over the weekend and past weeks. We share our deepest condolences with those who lost loved ones and those who are suffering. With that.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and welcome back.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. On the Middle East.
Yeah.
Your comments in the opening suggest that you are quite concerned about the risk or the potential for a much wider war. What exactly is the State Department doing in terms of preparation for that possibility?
So we are concerned about the risk of the conflict escalating, the conflict spreading. It's something, as you know, we've been concerned about since October 7th, and there have been various times over the course of this conflict that the risk has been especially acute. Now, of course, is one of those times. And so what we are doing, the Secretary and others in the State Department are communicating with all the relevant parties in the region to make clear, as I said in my opening remarks, that escalation is in no one's interest, and asking that people use their diplomatic relationships to make that clear to others in the region.
Okay, for this, my specific question, and I'm sure there's tons to say about your outreach to other countries. I'm talking about internally within the U.S. government, what is being done to prepare for the possibility that that there is a wider war and that there will be American citizens in need.
So there are a few different things. So let me take a broad answer to that before getting to the specific last one. Obviously, you've seen the Defense Department make certain announcements with regard to force posture. Deterrence is an important part of encouraging de-escalation. And so we will continue to take steps along that regard. Of course, we prepare for the possibility of further conflict. That being said, I want to just make it clear in answering the question that we don't think conflict is inevitable or should be inevitable, or that increased conflict is inevitable. We're going to continue to work to try to prevent it from happening. But of course, we prepare for all possibilities. That has been the case since October 7th. Obviously, you saw that over the weekend, we sent out a message to American citizens in Lebanon, making clear that Lebanon is a do not travel country. It's a level 4 country. We issued a security alert encouraging U.S. citizens who wish to depart Lebanon to book any ticket available for them, even if that flight does not depart immediately or does not follow their first choice route. And we'll continue to monitor the situation and make assessments and take actions based on response to real-time events.
All right. So last one, you keep saying, or you're saying that a wider war is not inevitable, and you don't think it should be inevitable. But do you think that an Iranian response or an Iranian attack on Israel is inevitable,
Uh,
whether or not that leads to
yeah.
a broader war?
So I can't speak to what may or may not happen. That is a decision for Iran to make. We have been sending consistent messages through our diplomatic engagements, encouraging people to communicate to the government of Iran that escalation is not in their interest, and that we will defend Israel from attacks, and that escalation does not serve Iran's interests, just as it doesn't serve the interests of anyone in the region. So I don't want to say it's inevitable. Certainly the risk is there, and that's why we are pursuing these diplomatic engagements.
And from your perspective, is any kind of Iranian response an escalation?
I don't want to prejudge from here what our view of a response might be, other than to say we don't want to see Iran take further action. And that's the message we are consistently delivering to our partners in the region.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome back. Given some of the tough rhetoric that we've seen reported between the U.S. and Israel, specifically about whether the U.S. would bail out Israel should it escalate another time after this one, are there any limitations being placed on U.S. involvement in what's expected to develop in the coming days?
So I don't know what you mean by limitations. We have made clear that we will defend Israel against attacks from Iran, against attacks from terrorist groups. That is part of our longstanding ironclad security our ironclad commitment to Israel's security. At the same time, as I made clear in my opening comments, as the Secretary made clear in comments he made on the road last week, we don't want to see any party take steps to escalate this conflict.
By limitations, I mean there's a difference between intercepting and defensive actions versus engaging in counterstrikes or even preemptive strikes, which have been floated by the Israelis as a possibility. Is there anything that the U.S. is drawing lines in front of in terms of those actions?
So I'm not going to get into the conversations that we have with any of our allies or partners in the region, other than to say, there's a general rule, we don't want to see escalation. And that is a statement that applies to all parties to this conflict.
Given the Secretary's call as the President's personal outreach to King Abdullah in Jordan, can you say whether the Jordanians are as willing as they were in April to engage again in the coming days' development?
I'm not going to speak to that in detail. Obviously, in April, we were able to put together a coalition of countries that were willing to defend Israel against attacks from Iran. We do believe it's important to continue to defend Israel against attacks, whether they come from Iran or whether they come from Iran's proxies. We, of course, have conversations with our allies and partners about that, but I'm not going to detail those publicly. Again, I do want to say that we don't think these attacks should be inevitable. We don't think that they should happen. We don't think that they're in Iran's interests. But of course, it is prudent for us to take steps to deter and eventually, if necessary, defend against those attacks should they occur.
Without specifying countries individually, are you confident that you have at least the same level of coalition that you had assembled in April?
I just don't want to speak to it publicly. We are committed to the defense of Israel against attacks from Iran and its proxies, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, two more questions. One, are there any preparations being made to evacuate U.S. citizens from Lebanon at this stage?
So we always plan for all contingencies, and that's not just a statement I would make today. That is something that we have has been clear since October 7th. We have planned for all of the possible contingencies, including the broadening of this conflict, including the escalation of this conflict. Our posture as it relates to American citizens in Lebanon today is that we recommend that U.S. citizens who can depart Lebanon find a way to do so.
Okay, but nothing specific on the potential of an evacuation?
I don't have anything to announce here, but as I said, we always prepare for all contingencies.
Okay, and on prospects for a ceasefire deal, which this department and other agencies in the U.S. government have been stressing is a crucial key step. I mean, it appears notable that the talks over the weekend in Cairo were hours long. The CIA director was not there. Not to say that an absence of U.S., an altogether absence of the U.S. presence, but isn't that an indication that there's nowhere to go on ceasefire talks right now? I mean, how would you characterize them? Are they not stalled?
So I wouldn't characterize them as stalled. I would characterize them the way we have said before, which is we have reached an agreement on the framework. That agreement still stands. Nothing that's happened over the course of the past week has done anything to erode the fundamental agreement on the framework to this ceasefire. That stands, but where we also what's true is that we continue to have other areas where we need to bridge the differences between the two parties. And so, look, ultimately, it's not a decision the United States can make. It requires the parties to take these choices, and it requires the parties to get to yes. and not look for reasons to delay and not look for reasons to say no. And so the message that we have consistently communicated to everyone in the region is we want to see a ceasefire. We think a ceasefire is in the interest of Israel. It's in the interest of the Israeli people. It's in the interest of the Palestinian people. It is in the interest of the broader region. So we are going to continue to use all of the diplomatic muscle, all of the influence that we can bring to bear to push to get this ceasefire over the line.
And since this is the first time we're hearing from you specifically, I mean, would you say that the assassination of Hania, who was, of course, a lead negotiator in these talks, was at least not conducive to seeing them brought over the finish line?
You know, the president spoke to this over the weekend, and I think I'll let his word stand. We said it certainly didn't help.
I have another one for Russia that later.
Okay.
Thanks.
Jordan has, of course, been heavily engaged with the Iranians as well. President Biden had a call today with his counterpart in Jordan. Can you say if any messages to Iran have been disseminated through the Jordanians or any other channel urging de-escalation?
So I will let all of the countries in the region speak to what diplomatic engagements they might have had with Iran. But obviously, one of the points of the engagements that we have had is to urge countries to pass messages to Iran and urge countries to make clear to Iran that it is very much not in their interests to escalate this conflict, that it is very much not in their interests to launch another attack on Israel. And so I'll let countries speak to the degree to which they've had those conversations. But I can tell you in the engagements that we have had, every engagement that the secretary has had, not just over the weekend, not just today, but going through to last weekend, he has heard a consensus position from all of our allies and partners, both in the region and around the world, that they don't want to see the conflict escalated. So certainly I would expect that some of them would pass that message along and impress that point upon the government of Iran, but I'll let each individual country speak to their particular conversations.
So there's a consensus position against escalation, but is there a consensus on whether Iran does have the right to launch any kind of retaliatory act?
The consensus position is that Iran should not take further action. That's what we hear over and over, is that further action just raises the tensions, raises the risk of the conflict spreading and getting out of hand. Look, the last time we found ourselves in this position, when Iran launched attacks against Israel in mid-April, you saw a series of attacks, and then ultimately the conflict didn't widen further. It's not to say that those attacks were in any way acceptable. Of course they weren't. That's why we'd help defend Israel against them. But that was a moment of real peril for the region. And we were able to chart a path that ultimately got us through that time without it tipping into a wider war. But every time you have one of these cycles of escalation, you have a risk of parties miscalculating. You have the risk of them taking actions that get out of hand or that have unintended consequences. And that can affect the ceasefire negotiations. It can affect the risk of broader conflict. And so the message that we are consistently sending is don't take this step. You don't need to. It doesn't serve anything. And it only puts the entire region at risk. Alex, go ahead.
There does seem to be consensus that something is coming and that something is coming soon. I was wondering if you could speak to reports that the secretary told his counterparts, the G7, that this could happen today or tomorrow, and why you think that the time frame essentially has shrunk compared to last time when Iran took a bit more time to prepare for their response.
So I'm not going to speak to those reports. And again, as I've said, we don't think this attack should happen, and we are working to try to prevent it from happening. So I'm not going to give you any kind of window, any kind of delineation of when we might be in a window or a potential window of attacks that we're trying to prevent in the first place. So that's the focus that we have, is trying to impress upon everyone in the region that escalation is in no one's interest and they shouldn't take